First of all, we just got a comment that I just want to share from a viewer. I haven't watched his financial predictions yet, but will later. I hadn't watched Zeihan until recently, but in the first stuff I saw by him, he predicted of the zero COVID protests would bring down G and that Ukraine would take Crimea. I think those are not good predictions. My bias is anti-China, pro-Russia. Okay, so let me comment on that.
I want to comment on that one too.
So he made some bad calls about the Russia-Ukraine thing starting in February or so, I believe. And yes, I agree with you on that. And he said that the COVID protests would bring down Xi.
He said
because
it could.
I've read a little.
Sorry,
Yeah. So because I read a little more, I'm halfway through his book right now. That's not the only thing. The bigger picture is to Zeihan regarding China is that they are facing a demographic crisis, unlike anything we've ever seen anywhere else in the world, ever. And they're facing an economic crisis because of the bigger picture issue of the U.S. is not going to patrol global trade any longer. And China depends on that almost more than anyone else. China doesn't have very good soil, very good arable land. China doesn't have enough or nearly enough oil to feed itself. So China needs to import a whole bunch of stuff to survive, to feed its people, to keep the lights on. And they need to export a bunch of stuff to pay for those things. And import, export, all dependent on this super safe, super secure global trade protected by the US Navy is not going to be the case for much longer. So he's saying that China is moving into, is going, even before the zero COVID protests and all of this. This book was written in February of 2022. He says China is moving into a political basket case situation that could blow up anywhere at any point in time. And that will lead to possible revolutions, possible splintering apart into different factions within the country, all kinds of basket case scenario stuff. So, yeah, G is still there, obviously,
And
but
then, I could add something to China
right now. But
yeah. I can
Yeah,
add
go
something
ahead.
to China. So Peter Zeihan did point out. I've watched several videos of him discussing this. Is he says as an opening is if we look at the historicity of China, like what typically happens is that China. I mean, as much as they try to portray themselves as this unified country and this unified people, is really, really economically diverse. And he even excuse me, I meant to say ethnically diverse, and it's also economically diverse in the sense that he pointed out that, like, okay, in rich areas people are richer, and poor areas or people are poorer. In the United States, you say, okay, let's compare New York to West Virginia, and maybe the people in New York make twice as much money as the people in West Virginia. In China, you have areas. It's not 1 to 2; it's 1 to 10. So there's these massive, not just ethnic disparities, but economic disparities, and that typically in Chinese history, once the ruler has in quotes unified the country and a similar situation starts to occur, one of two things happens. The first is everything breaks down into warring tribes, this is where we get the Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Dynasty Warriors video games from, right? Everything breaks down into warring factions, and you get warlords fighting over control. Or the emperor, in this case Xi, right, super duper clamps down and goes ultra mega authoritarian to stomp out any sort of dissent. And so with these COVID protests, what I'm understanding that Zeihan is predicting here is that we're starting to see conditions in China similar to conditions in past China where something like this has happened before. Now, the update that I heard from his initial prediction is that apparently Xi has relaxed COVID restrictions and has said, okay, local authorities can now implement their own COVID restrictions in order for them to be flexible. However, the problem that still comes with that is the fact that everybody's still fucking terrified of him. And so if you're bad, you get punished because you were bad. And if you're good, you get punished because you just made Xi look bad. So I don't think that his predictions are off the table yet. Xi just may have pushed it down the road a hair.
Yes, and bigger picture, just the fact that you have these protests, pretty vigorous protests and pretty violent protests at times. I mean, violent in the sense people are using violence to defend themselves, which I'm not saying that's illegitimate or whatever, but it's all symptoms of the country going crazier and crazier at the moment. And this is all stuff that he has already, his big picture analysis accounts for these kinds of things.
Xi is just kind of a flavor on top of the big picture analysis.
Yes,
he's like frosting.
Because he's all aside from the demographics, economics, trade issues that they're facing. He also says that Xi has consolidated more power than any Chinese dictator ever has in history.
Well, any human ever has in history.
More than Mao.
Yeah.
So,
He said over any human in history. Really? I'm guessing because of the advanced social credit network stuff that previous dictators never could have dreamed of.
Yeah. The Klaus.
The Klaus Schwab wet dreams. Yes. Yes. There's one other important point I wanted to mention on what you said about China regarding the fact that the U.S. is no longer going to guard world trade. Peter Zeihan also pointed out China doesn't have the ability to guard its own trade from a naval sense because its navy is piss poor. And at least according to whatever data that he's able to get, China can navally project maximum 1,500 miles, and that's assuming they're not under fire. If they're under fire, it's 350 miles.
I didn't know this. He writes in his book, China has 2 carriers. One of them used to be a cruise ship.
And the second one is modeled after the one that used to be a cruise ship. So, is China a paper dragon or not? I think paper might be a little stronger than the situation that they're looking at.